In 2003, there was a brutally simple clinical study where they investigated the effects of sleep deprivation on cognitive performance. So they had a sample size of 35 people over here, and they basically partitioned these 35 people, which were healthy adults, into 3 specific groups. And there was a group that had 8 hours of time in bed, 6 hours time in bed, and 4 hours of time in bed. And so these scientists would basically restrict each group to sleep only the allocated amount of hours that they were given. So for this 4 hours time in bed, they would only be able to sleep 4 hours over the span of 14 days. And the results of this study were very, very statistically significant and frankly, a little bit unsettling, because the group that spent 4 hours time in bed compounded over 14 days, when at the end, they took a cognitive test known as the DST, Digit Symbol Substitution Test. They basically had the same level of cognitive functionality as a person who has been awake for 48 hours. But this one will definitely shock you, because for the group that had 6 hours of time in bed compounded over 14 days, basically had the same level of cognitive function as a person who had been awake for 24 hours. This is extremely unsettling, because 6 hours is usually the average time that college students like you and me sleep during their college years. And of course, as expected, the 8 hours of time in bed basically had no negligible effect. So when they investigated the trend of the DSST scores, which they took every single day for 14 days, the group that spent 8 hours of time in bed every single day basically had a constant improvement in their DSST score. However, the group that had a 6 hours of time in bed basically had a very stagnant DSST score. You would expect that if you do this test multiple times, you should theoretically get better at it, right? And this is particularly because sleep actually enhances the level of neuroplasticity in your brain, which is the ability, in other words, the ability for your brain to learn. And for the group that was basically sleep deprived, 4 hours of time in bed the whole time, had a regression in the DSST score. And so the reason why I actually bring this study up is because most people, especially college students or high school students like you or me, don't actually understand the importance of sleep and how so damn important it actually is for our daily life. There's plenty of scientific evidence that shows that a lack of sleep can lead to memory loss, reduction in cognitive ability, stress, depression, and lowering of testosterone and estrogen, i.e. your sex hormones. And so if you're a college student and you feel that throughout the day, your attention is lapsing, you cannot focus, you can't really remember anything, and you sometimes even feel a little bit stressed out and overwhelmed, that might be because of a lack of sleep. So I'm going to give you my personal story of how I actually discovered the importance of sleep. So in year 12, when I was still doing my AS levels, I was basically averaging 6 to 7.5, probably 6 to 7 hours of sleep every single night. And the reason why was because I would stay up late with my friends to play video games. Like we will hop on this Discord server and join like a Roblox server, and we would like play Roblox games and Genshin Impact and all these other things. However, somewhere between year 12 and year 13, I discovered this podcast called the Andrew Huberman podcast. And the founder, Andrew Huberman, is an extremely intelligent person who actually goes into the scientific studies. And I started watching his podcasts on health, sleep, dopamine, and motivation, and how to be more productive and all of these things. So I started doing his protocols like morning routine, night routine, exercise, caffeine. And I started being able to average around 8 to 8 hours and a half of sleep every single night. So a couple of benefits that I personally noticed was, number one, a clearer mind and better focus during my morning math classes. So in the morning, I was taking A-levels at the time, so I had A-level maths and A-level further maths, usually on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I found that ever since I started sleeping better, my mental performance in solving the equations and actually learning this stuff dramatically increased. I also had increased focus and output, and I was able to grind 2 to 3 past papers every single day during my free periods instead of the usual 1 or 2 past papers. The next benefit I noticed from improving my sleep was actually an increase in strength, like physical strength and testosterone. So I got my testosterone levels checked at around year 13, beginning of year 13-ish. And I noticed that my testosterone levels were around 850. which is actually pretty high for a guy my age. And I also found that my strength, literally my physical strength in the gym was improving because of an increase in sleep. And also girls started to look at me differently, but that's another topic for another video. Now the final benefit and the most important result that I was able to get from improving my sleep was better grades. So I don't mind disclosing this to you, but my AS level grades were around 91% in computer science, 83 in business, and 93 in math. But in my A levels, I was able to get all of these 3 subjects from like low A star to all A stars. So I got 3 A stars, which is the highest level grade in the A level curriculum. And I went from a 91% in computer science to a 99. I went from an 85 in business to a average 93. And for math, I went from 93 to 97. Now, of course, I started implementing more study techniques, such as flashcards, and I focused heavily more on active recall. Besides, my diet also improved, and I was actually studying a lot harder than when I was in year 12. But I really do feel that sleep was one of the main key pillars that helped me to get these results. So now I'm going to give you 3 scientifically backed benefits of sleep, and then afterwards, if you watch until the later part of the video, I'm also going to give you 3 actionable steps that you can use to improve your sleep. The first benefit is that sleep actually helps you improve your memory. So how this works is that throughout the day, you accumulate information. When you study, you encode information inside your brain. You accumulate information, right? That's pretty easy to understand. And all this information goes into this little part of your brain called the hippocampus. Now, if you're a computer science student like me, you can kind of imagine like the hippocampus is kind of like the RAM stick, random access memory. And for those of you who don't know what that is, basically, at the end of the day, when you shut down your computer, the memory just gets deleted. So sleep is essentially acting as this save button. And this save button allows you to put this memory that's stored in the hippocampus into more long-term memory. And this long-term memory is essentially the same as a hard drive in computer science. So if you were not able to get enough sleep that night, then the information that's stored in your hippocampus gets deleted. There's a study that showed that around 40% of information was forgotten when the participant only slept like 5 hours that night. So I'll give you some math behind this just to help you illustrate this point a little bit more. Let's say you encoded 100 units of information into your hippocampus during that day. If you slept 5 hours, you would only remember 60% of that information. And this is information that has already been this is like the really useful information that you're able to curate. Like this is like doing questions, doing things that actually burn the information inside your hippocampus. Realistically, your hippocampus can store like a lot more. This is just like a generalization. If you have 100 units here, a 40% reduction means you only have 60 units left. If I was looking at this diagram, I would look at it and think that, well, why the hell would I sabotage my learning and my memory by sleeping less? If I had slept, more hours, like if I had slept 8 hours, I would have probably been able to remember 100 units of memory. Like I would have been able to remember most of it. And it's actually not just about memory. It's about creativity and actually making connections. So when your brain is actually in REM sleep, your brain has this tendency to reconsolidate and pulsate neurons hundreds and thousands of times. So when that happens, essentially, you're basically getting repetitions of that same material many times inside your brain. One other really interesting point is that sleep actually also kind of acts as a hard drive recovery function. So within this 100 units, there might be like 10 units that have been corrupted or that's almost basically forgotten. Like it's somewhere between it's kind of in and out the hippocampus. Like it's basically almost forgotten by your brain. Sleep can actually tap into these reserved units and help you reconsolidate that into long-term memory. The second benefit of getting good sleep is that sleep acts as an emotional regulator. Dr. Matt Walker, in his podcast with Andrew Huberman, mentions that sleep is basically kind of like this emotional therapy. When you're sleeping, your brain actually kind of goes through its past memories and starts to reconsolidate and recollect them in such a way that it doesn't damage your mental stress. And so one interesting thing that those two scientists said was that when they look at comments on their YouTube videos and the YouTube video analytics, a bad comment actually derails them much more when they have less sleep when compared to when they had much better sleep. So if you're constantly feeling stressed out and you actually don't know why, it's probably because you lack sleep. And the third thing is sexual drive and motivation. You've probably heard me mention before that when I got better sleep, my testosterone levels improved. Well, why is this actually important? It's because testosterone in both males and females, by the way, not just males, increases the propensity to make effort feel good. It makes effort feel good. And not only that, it also increases your sexual drive, which is basically the foundation for your energy levels. And this hormone testosterone, is only recharged when you're in REM sleep. So a little fun fact for you college guys out there. You know that women can actually detect the amount of testosterone that a man has. And they do this through olfaction. It basically means your bodily odor. This is extremely interesting. And you can look at it in your own time. But in other words, if you want to attract more ladies, then you should probably increase your testosterone because women can actually detect that. So how much should you actually sleep? Well, according to Dr. Matthew Walker, he mentioned that 8 hours seem to be the norm. And 8 hours is pretty good. Now, there's actually tons of ways for you to improve your sleep. And if you want to do your own further research, you can check out Dr. Andrew Huberman and Dr. Matthew Walker. However, I'm just going to give you the 3 most actionable and the 3 most useful tips that have worked for me personally. And if you find this video helpful and you would like to get some more personalized help from me, then you can check out my private online community, A-Star Students, where we basically help college students like you get better grades and make an academic comeback. We've already seen many noticeable transformations from students all around the world, and you can sign up at school.com/A-Star-Students. So tip number 1 would be melatonin optimization. So how does your body and your brain actually know when it's time to sleep? It's all due to this hormone called melatonin, which is secreted by the brain in the pineal gland before you sleep. And what this does is you can kind of imagine it like an announcer or a loudspeaker that yells at your brain and says, go and sleep. That's basically what it's doing. So you can kind of imagine like it's like an Olympic runner race, like 100 meters. There's like a bunch of guys lining up on the race, and there's this person that calls the shot and says, take your marks, beep. And that beep is exactly what melatonin is doing. It's basically signaling the start of the race. So the melatonin guy does not actually participate in the race of sleep, but it instructs the rest of the racers, which is, in this analogy, the different parts of your brain, to generate sleep. So the main thing you need to know about melatonin is that, number 1, caffeine destroys melatonin production, and secondly, bright light kills melatonin, and vice versa. So some of you might not know this, but caffeine actually has a half-life of around 5 to 6 hours. This means that if you drink coffee at 3 p.m. during the day, 6 hours later, you're still going to have approximately 50% of the caffeine still left inside your brain. So in other words, when it's 9 p.m. and it's close to your bedtime, you still have 50% of the caffeine that's still in your brain, still inhibiting melatonin production and preventing you from going to sleep. So what I do personally is I don't drink any caffeine after 12 p.m. For me personally, I think that caffeine has quite a potent effect on myself. And when I drink coffee at around 12 p.m., I will not be able to sleep that night. Maybe I'm just a rare breed, but I know some people who drink coffee and they still can sleep. Well, that just really depends on their level of caffeine tolerance. And the second thing to help you optimize melatonin is to understand that bright light actually kills melatonin and dark light helps your brain to produce melatonin. So what does this actually mean? I'll give you an example. In the morning, you can go outside and look at the sunlight which is what Andrew Huberman recommends in his morning routine. And what that will do is that it will basically kill off the remaining melatonin inside your brain. It will tell the sunlight, look, the sunlight that goes into your eyes will travel through the optic nerve system and alert your pineal gland to basically say, no more melatonin production. And conversely, if you flip this around, if you want to improve your sleep at night, then during the evening or like 1 hour or 2 hours before bed, switch off the bright lights and turn on more dimmer lights. So what I do personally is that when it's around 1 hour before my actual bedtime, I will switch off this light that's in the middle of the room, and I will calibrate that light to be the color red. Now, this is a bit more extreme. If you don't have this function where you can change the color of your light bulb, then you can simply just turn off the light and turn on like a dimmer lamp. However, if you're like a severe health maxer like I am, then you can install something called a smart light bulb. This will basically change color when you flip the switch twice. And that's exactly what it does. I'll show you right now. So I don't know if you can see this, but the room now is a lot more red. You probably can't see it because there's like surrounding light and there's like sunlight and all of these things. But red light is scientifically proven to encourage relaxation and perhaps even melatonin production. This is what Andrew Huberman does. So this is what I do. The second thing that I think is quite useful for you to know is circadian rhythm optimization. So our body tends to operate in a sleep and wake cycle of approximately 24 hours, not just 24 hours, but 24 hours and 15 minutes. And the way the body actually knows that it's time to wake up and time to sleep depends on a couple of environmental factors. One of them being sunlight. You can imagine like this body clock is something that we all innately have inside us. It's interesting because there's actually a group of scientists who went into a cave for like 36 days, and they found out that even in the absence of light, they were able to have that 24-hour sleep and wake cycle. However, that being said, sunlight kind of acts as this guiding compass, and it helps us reset that circadian rhythm to make it so that we wake up and sleep at different times during the day. And this makes sense, right? Our ancestors probably had to wake up with the sun, like they had no alarms and stuff. And they would go hunt and come back, and they would come back and sleep when the sun was down. This makes total evolutionary sense. However, sunlight isn't actually the only way for your body to time its clock. If you really want to go the further extra mile, you could also increase or decrease your body temperature. When you want to sleep, it's best to lower your body temperature because that will allow you to get into deeper sleep, according to Matthew Walker. Turn your aircon on at a high setting at night, and I guarantee you that your sleep will actually be better. The second thing that I do is to work out in the morning, or if I can't work out, I would take a cold shower. I personally do take cold showers. It really helps me to warm my body up, and a warm body signifies awakeness. And the last tip that I have is sleep windows. Your sleep schedule really depends on your own personal chronotype. This is something that I recently discovered. Before that, I thought that all of us had the same sort of sleep schedule, and we would be able to sleep at 10 p.m. and wake up at 6 a.m. no problem. However, upon reading Matthew Walker's book on why we sleep, there's actually something called a chronotype, which is genetically determined. Like you basically cannot change it. And for different people, this might be different. So you've probably heard of the phenomenon of night owls. Well, I personally am not a night owl. I am the complete opposite. I feel that I work best during the morning, and I feel like shit during the afternoon. I would wake up, and that immediately for that period of 4 to 5 hours, I would be very, very focused. However, I know some people that would wake up and not be able to work unless they drank their morning coffee. Those people are known as the night owls. And there's something called a morningness, eveningness questionnaire that you can Google. It will basically determine your chronotype for you. But going back to sleep windows is basically, instead of setting a very strict sleeping time and waking up time, you basically set a range of numbers. So for example, for me, my sleep window right now is 10:30 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. Now, the reason why this is actually so important is because regularity of sleep scheduling allows your brain to know when it's supposed to secrete melatonin. Recall that I said that melatonin was like this announcer that announces your brain to generate sleep. Well, if you don't sleep regularly, how does your pineal gland know when to actually make that announcement? It doesn't. So I try to keep my sleep schedule as regular as possible. However, putting a specific time, like 10:30 p.m., is probably going to be quite unrealistic because there's just going to be some days where I'm not able to follow that specific strict sleep schedule. And so what a sleep window allows you to do is to basically remove the unnecessary stress that your brain generates when it sees that you've passed your bedtime. In other words, it makes it more flexible so you don't have to stress about your sleep. So yeah, that's it for this video. I know this video is pretty long, but if you made it to the end, I've covered the consequences of sleep, why we actually need to sleep, and a sleep study as well. And I also gave you 3 scientific benefits of sleep. Sleep improved memory, emotional regulation, sexual drive. You should be sleeping 8 hours per day, and I gave you 3 actionable tips to help you improve your sleep starting today. As always, I hope this video has been really valuable for you, and may God guide us on the right path. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next video.